Antonio. What you are fighting here, you are a microcosm of the crisis that we are facing all across America and all across the world, but you are also a microcosm of the power that we have in our hands right here, right now, to create that revolution and restore the just and sustainable future that is within our reach. So I salute you for that. I salute you for being the power, for being the challenge, for not being intimidated, for not being cut, for daring to stand up and struggle. And I want to start just by agreeing that what's going on in the border towns, in Cairns, is not just an injustice, it's an outright crime. Yes. This is a crime this is the age of refugees, you know. If you're not a refugee today, your family was a refugee not that long ago, and you are at risk. We are all at risk for being refugees tomorrow. Climate refugees or economic refugees. This is the time, you know, for us to stand up to the dignity of humanity and treat each other as if we all counted, as if we're all human beings. This needs to be the era of the golden rule. This needs to be the era of doing unto others, because we are all on one small boat, and that boat is in great peril right now, and we all need to be working together to get us out of the storm. Yeah. Woo! And I want to agree with the comments that several of the speakers made, that what we see going on in this criminalization of refugees, it's especially criminal because what the refugees are fleeing is the consequence of predatory U.S. policies. Yeah. A predatory drug war, the trade policies, the predatory corporate trade agreements that dumped U.S. agricultural goods on peasant farmers, particularly in Mexico, forcing millions of people to come here in order to feed their families. And the U.S. interventions, the CIA and the military interventions, particularly in Guatemala, in El Salvador, in Honduras. This is why we have created failed states on our own border and south of our own border. So it is especially unacceptable that we are criminalizing the refugees from our own policies. There are millions of refugees now in the Middle East which are in a very similar situation. They are fleeing the failed states and the terrorism crisis that we have very much created. Yeah, if the countries of Europe were now incarcerating and detaining the Syrian refugees, this country would be declaring an utter human rights crisis. Yet this is what we are doing here on our very own borders. And I find that when you actually have a chance to talk to people about it, you know, people are really clueless about the background to this crisis. They're clueless that these are actually refugees on the border who've come here seeking asylum, and we lock them up, women and children in particular. It's absolutely unconscionable, as it is unconscionable that immigrant families, who are the backbone of our communities, our economy, and our culture, are being ripped away from their communities, torn apart as families, and deported. And this is a time for us to stand up and say, no more deportations, no more detentions, that we are creating a welcoming and appreciative path to citizenship now. It's such an honor to be able to be a part of this election dialogue, to be able to be a disruptor of the absolutely false deceptions that are being perpetrated on the American public. So I really want to thank all of you who are doing the hard work, the hard grassroots work in our frontline communities, because it's exactly that work that I am trying to lift up and shine a light on so that we can all benefit from it.
Do it.
So we view ourselves racial dialogue. To the issues of Black Lives Matter and the violence, which is not only police violence, it's not only violence in the courts, it's not only violence in the prisons, this is systemic racist violence throughout society. In our economy, where we saw about 10 years ago, the average wealth of the average African American family, this is an absolutely devastating statistic, was 10 cents on the dollar of a Caucasian family. An outrage. But what has happened over the past 8 years since the so-called recovery? That wealth has diminished from 10 cents on the dollar to 5 cents on a dollar. It's absolutely unconscionable. So racism has to be fixed at that level of our economies as well. In hiring, in health, where the average African American, if you can believe this, and as a medical doctor I was absolutely stunned to hear that 7 years are taken off the average African American life simply for living black. 7 years are taken off the lifespan of the average African American. But it doesn't stop there. If you add to that the health consequences of poor education, and poor education is not just a matter of your income, it is actually a matter of your health, your welfare, and your survival. And if you add the consequences of poor education to the consequences of just being black, it's not 7 years, it's a staggering 14 years taken off the life of the average African American who does not have the opportunity for a decent education. So we are calling in our campaign for a national plan of action now for racial justice now. That are ready to go every time there is the loss of life or if there is an abuse in police custody and there is violence and harm done to a black life or a Latino life, that we are ready to go to investigate and prosecute police racist abuse whenever it happens and wherever it happens. So that when there are police that are committing these crimes, they are stopped in their tracks, and they are taken off the police force, and they are held accountable for their crimes. So this is a problem that we can fix. On the issue of education, we need to be funding education like it counts, not cutting education so we can provide more tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires, which is basically what has gone on. We need to fully fund education, and we need to actually perform education in the schools. High-stakes testing and rote learning is not education. Any educator knows that. An end to high-stakes testing. Instead, we need to be educating the whole student for lifetime learning, and that includes especially arts, music, recreation, culture. This is what democracy looks like, and this is what democracy requires. We cannot have a democracy without an educated population. So this is essential to the cause of democracy. What else is essential to the cause of democracy? Well, we cannot have an entire generation serving as indentured students and indentured servants, I should say, to the banks and the outrageous costs of higher education. For a long time, the Green Party has been calling for free public higher education, which we deserve. But we deserve more than that. We bailed out the banks, whose waste, fraud, and abuse got the economy into the crisis that it's in to start with. We bailed them out. Not for $1 trillion, not for $5 trillion, not for 10 or 15. $17 trillion is how much we have bailed out the crooks for. Isn't it time we bailed out the students? So that every young person doesn't have to choose between being an indentured servant to their loans and working some lousy minimum wage job because it gives them a secure income. They don't have to choose between that or high unemployment rates for not having a higher education degree of some sort. We know now that young people who are not able to go on to college or to some kind of technical school or a community college have outrageous unemployment rates. You're looking at 30% among Caucasian youth, approximately 40% among Latino youth, and 50% among African American youth. This is unacceptable. We need every student to have free and available access for public higher education, and for those who are in debt to have their debt canceled. And of course, we need health care as a human right through Medicare for all. And we can put it back together again because they knocked some privatization holes in it. So we can make Medicare whole, and then we can expand it. We know that the overhead in Medicare is approximately 2%, but the overhead in this massive red tape and bureaucracy of the private health insurance system is more like 17, 18, 20%. So simply by streamlining that and making health care administration very simple and easy with the swipe of a credit card. You don't need some newfangled website that will fail for years at a time. You don't need health connectors that raise your rates by 5-10% that charge you. I heard in Massachusetts it's now going to be something like $1,000 for an emergency room visit so they can hold down the rate of inflation. Instead, it's a very administratively simple process, and through all the money we save, we can ensure that everyone has comprehensive, first-class health care so that everyone is covered from cradle to grave in your entirety. Mental health, reproductive health, eyes, ears, all. Handout. The question often comes up, so, how do we make this happen? And I want to let you in on one of a few secrets. We have a kind of a secret weapon here, and it's called the power of youth. And let me tell you how we engage it. There are 40 million millennials who are in debt with no way out. Because what is it that we're being offered by the two corporate parties? Oh, more free trade agreements, which are great if you're a corporation. Otherwise, it sends your job overseas and lowers your wages. Or more tax breaks for the wealthy and for corporations. That's about it. That's about all they have to offer. So it's clear things are not getting better. They're getting worse on this trajectory. I have found very few young people out there who are not passionately interested in canceling their debt. And it's approximately 2/3 of all people who have the privilege of going on to higher education that have debt. And the average debt is about $23,000 last I checked. Probably quite a bit higher than that now. And it's 40 million people, but it's going to be more than that by the time the election rolls around. So if word gets out that 40 million people can go to the polls and basically cancel their debt self-fulfilling prophecy. Because 40 million people is actually enough to win a three-way race, especially if you throw in another 25 million Latino voters who've learned that the Democrats are the party of deportation and the Republicans are the party of fear and hate-mongering. It's about time for immigrants to have a new party that's worthy of their participation. So if you know anybody out there who's good at social networking, and I have met a few millennials in my lifetime who are particularly good at this, this is the kind of revolution that can kind of spread like a wildfire through social media, through guerrilla networking. Hey, want to come out in November of 2016 and end our debt? Yeah, I think I could be interested in that, you know. I think I could bring out a few friends. I think I could tell a few people. So that is one of the actually real strategies by which, you know, an incredible voter revolt could actually be motivated to happen. But there are so many reasons for it to happen. You know, we're often told that we have to be good little boys and girls, and we have to just vote for the lesser evil. We should be very quiet and use the politics of fear, which means voting not for your deeply held beliefs, but voting against what you fear the most. Well, that politics of fear has a track record. And if you have friends and family members out there who don't quite agree with you, you know, you can be like, I consider myself a political therapist, and what we have to do is help our friends break up with abusive political relationships. And you can just remind them, you know, what the facts are on the ground, what actually happened with this politics of fear, voting for the lesser evil. What we found was that the politics of fear actually brought us everything we were afraid of. And it's worth remembering that mantra. The politics of fear brings us everything we're afraid of. It has done that, because all those reasons we were told, you don't dare vote for Cynthia McKinney, or you don't dare vote for Ralph Nader, or David Cobb, or myself. You don't dare do it, because then we would get the really bad guy who would deport immigrants. You know, he would go after the civil liberties of African Americans. He would bail out Wall Street. He would attack the climate and escalate all those carbon emissions. He would expand all these wars for oil abroad. Well, what did we get under Obama? Even when he had 2 Democratic houses of Congress. That's exactly what we got. So the bottom line is basically this. It says it on Laura's t-shirt over there, which is, forget the lesser evil, let's fight for the greater good. So I am just personally so inspired and so grateful, and I do want to give a shout out to my friend Laura over here. Holding the Green Party together and building the Green Party in Texas, and driving me around, driving both of us around, crisscrossing Texas practically. I really understand how big Texas is now. After driving from Houston to where? McAllen, and then to Laredo, and yeah, in Carson City, and then up here in about 24 hours practically. So it's awesome to see what's going on in Texas. It's really exciting, and I'm so grateful to the Green Party, and again, a big shout out for Rachel for bringing us together. And I also want to say a big shout out to all of you for doing the work that you're doing. This is an historic moment. It's an historic moment because we're in an unprecedented crisis, But it's also an historic moment because we're seeing an uprising for justice like we haven't seen in generations. And we're seeing people stand up and say that we deserve not only a police system that is not racist, that we deserve justice and peace and human rights in Palestine and throughout the Middle East, that we deserve quality public education. But for the first time in my life as an activist, we're seeing people say, it's not just one of these things, it's got to be all of these things. As a healthcare provider, I would say nobody ever came into my clinic, and you probably never went to your physician or your nurse and said, just take care of my kidneys. Forget about my heart and my lungs and my brain. You know, we are whole people. We live in a whole planet. One of the mottos for the Green Party now is that we will put people, planet, and peace over profit. And it's not rocket science that we have to do all of it. And saying just a quick word about the wars that are exploding before our very eyes right now in the Middle East. We heard Obama just 3 days ago say, oh, our troops are doing so much good in Afghanistan, let's leave them there indefinitely. Yes, right. We were going to be down to zero, supposedly, in the next couple of years, but they've decided, no, we had so much success with 100,000 people, 100,000 troops, let's keep 10,000 there. So we're now kind of digging in again in Afghanistan. We're certainly digging in again in Iraq. We are really dug in Syria with this new bombing campaign, as if we could bomb our way out of ISIS. What created ISIS was these bombing campaigns and the chaos that we brought predominantly to Iraq, but throughout the Middle East. That's what brought this crisis. So how do we fix ISIS? And I just want to put this out because we're led to believe like we have all these unsolvable problems. Oh, you got to pick between the environment or the economy. We couldn't possibly fix them both. You know, we have to pick between peace and justice. Well, you know, these are not, it's not rocket science how to solve these things. So ISIS, for example, we created ISIS. We can uncreate ISIS, too. We don't have to bomb ISIS, we can starve ISIS. Because if you try to bomb ISIS, you're just going to create a whole new terrorist organization that will be outraged. Because we learned last week that through these bombing campaigns with the drone wars, which are strategically targeted, right? You know, 9 out of 10 people that are killed by the drones are, oops, wrong person, sorry about that. This was a report that was leaked by a new Edward Snowden. We don't know who it is, but somebody just leaked that report. So this comes on pretty good authority. We don't need more of that. That's only going to get us in more trouble, which is why, actually, we need to cut the military budget at least 50% and put those resources. It's like the situation in Israel. Israel's militarism is not making it more secure. It's making deadly enemies out of all of its neighbors and out of the Palestinians. And out of the, super apartheid state that it's created within itself. Well, same thing is true for the U.S. You know, as Martin Luther King said decades ago, and it's only gotten worse, the greatest purveyor of violence around the world is the United States of America. So we need to fix that, and actually downsizing the military is going to help. We can bring our bases home. We are an occupying force in about 100 nations around the world. This does not win the hearts and minds of people around the world. And what we need to do about ISIS, just in brief, to get it on the record, that we don't have reason to go to more war here. We've been in this cycle of violence, which is only getting worse, and we need to stop it before it results in nuclear war with Russia, which we are on, arguably we are edging very close to right now. But for ISIS, it is our allies that are funding ISIS. So how about we rein in the Saudis so they stop funding ISIS. We can rein in our allies, the Turks, in Turkey, and ask them to please close their border. We ask them to close their border to the refugees, right?
Yeah.
Well, Europe asked Turkey to close their border to the refugees. How about Turkey closes its border to the jihadist militias?
Yeah.
Let's start with that. And who's arming ISIS? You know, it's largely our arms which are leaking over to into the hands of ISIS. We can, together with the Russians, we need to lead the way to an arms embargo. We're providing most of the arms to the world and the Middle East. How about we establish an arms embargo, a weapons embargo to the Middle East, including Israel, including Syria. And furthermore, our allies are buying the oil from ISIS on the black market. So it's not rocket science how to fix a problem like ISIS. It's not rocket science how to fix a problem like nuclear weapons and disarmament. Because guess what? A little known fact. It was actually the United States that pulled out of the nuclear weapons treaties with the Soviet Union. Actually, yes, it was with the Soviet Union when we pulled out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty. And we have established missiles and bombs surrounding Russia. This is like the Cuban Missile Crisis on steroids, especially now in Syria. We do not want to follow Hillary Clinton's advice and establish a no-fly zone, which basically means we will shoot down Russian airplanes, but oops, they have nuclear weapons, so maybe this is not a good idea. This is why we don't want corporate stooges and bullies in the White House and in the positions of leadership in this country. Opportunity not just of a lifetime, but perhaps the opportunity of all history. Because it's all history that is at risk right now. You know, we're seeing 150 species every day that are going extinct. We are on the verge of war with Russia. You know, we're seeing wars explode around us. We're seeing an absolute crisis of racial justice, a crisis of economic justice, a crisis of immigrant and human rights. This can't keep going in this direction very long. If only to look at the climate, you know, we know we have a couple of decades, and that's about it, before the flood.